How to Fix It. I love Saturday Night Live, though while it's perfectly fine now, I prefer old SNL, from Martin Short and Billy Crystal all the way back to the not ready for primetime players. And SNL has made many movies based on their characters, some better than others. One of my favorite sketches from the early years is a duo played by Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, the Blues Brothers, and the movie they made based on that sketch in 1980 is one of the best of the SNL movies. Action, adventure, music, comedy, that movie had it all. Not only do we have the Brothers in Blues and their band, but so many other famous musicians. Cab Calloway, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, and James Brown. Plus appearances from famous faces like John Candy, Carrie Fisher, and even
that model from the 70s named Sticky?
I think you mean Twiggy.
Get out of here, late 2000s SNL. We're talking about the classic version. Anyway, that movie was, and still is, a classic, with a magic that I don't think has ever been captured by any other SNL movie. Not even Wayne's World can match the awesomeness that is the Blues Brothers. But that doesn't mean that they didn't try. Yeah, Blues Brothers 2000. I don't know why I do all this beating around the bush. You saw the title, you know what's coming. Now, unlike a lot of other people, I don't hate the movie. I have a soft spot for Dan Aykroyd movies. Ghostbusters 2, Dragnet, it's Dan friggin' Aykroyd. But recently I was inspired to rewatch that movie from the suggestion put into the How to Fix It viewer Suggest-a-thon, which is still open, link in the description. And that inspired me to watch the Nostalgia Critic's rather scathing review of the film, and I think he might have been a little unfair to the movie, so today we're going to take a look at the sequel to the original Mission from Gad and see if Blues Brothers 2000 is really that bad, and if it is, how it can be fixed. Hit it! The movie centers around Elwood Blues, who gets out of prison following the events of the first movie to find that not only did the orphanage close anyway, but both his brother Jake, played by John Belushi, and their mentor Curtis, played by Cab Calloway, have since passed on. And nobody told him because they forgot to. But all is not lost, since Curtis had an illegitimate son, and since Curtis was the closest thing that Elwood had to a father, Cable, Curtis's son, is the closest thing he has to a brother. The Penguin, Sister Mary Stigmata, suggests that Elwood mentor a young boy, to ostensibly be to the boy what Curtis was to him and Jake, but he's not interested. He goes to meet with Cable, but Cable is an Illinois State police officer, and so is the farthest thing from being interested in joining the band, and kicks him to the curb when Elwood asks for money. On the way out, Buster steals his wallet, and they take his cash so Elwood can purchase a new bluesmobile to replace the old one that fell apart as soon as they got to the Cook County building in the first one. He takes Buster along and goes to work at a strip club owned and operated by Willie Hall, his former drummer, and he discovers that Willie is paying protection money to the Russian mob. Elwood and Mac McTeer, played by John Goodman, the bartender at Willie's club, try to make them leave the club alone, but that just results in the Russians burning the club to the ground and trying to kill Elwood and Mac. It turns out that Mac can sing, so Elwood decides that they have to get the band back together, because the Lord works in mysterious ways. Or as I call it, because I said so. They go to get the band back together, like in the first movie, getting Mr. Fabulous by pulling a similar stunt to how they convinced him to leave the fancy restaurant, get Matt Guitar Murphy away from his wife yet again, with another rendition of a one-word title Aretha Franklin hit, this time it being Respect instead of Think, and round up the others from their new jobs, some working at a radio station and one working at a phone sex call center. All while this is happening, Cable puts out a warrant for Elwood's arrest for both the stealing of his money and apparently kidnapping Buster. They also run afoul of Illinois' white supremacists as they head through gigs, getting ready for a big one at Queen Musette's Battle of the Bands. While at a tent revival, they run into their old friend Reverend Cleophas James. I say old friend even though they didn't really speak during the first movie. It was just that his sermon was the impetus for Jake and Elwood's quest, but this movie forgets that. And during the sermon, Cable shows up and is indoctrinated into the ways of the Blues Brothers, joining the band as well, and they make their way to Queen Musette's and audition, getting into the Battle of the Bands, but forced to go up against the Louisiana Gator Boys, a blues supergroup consisting of, among others, Eric Clapton, Isaac Hayes, Bo Diddley, B.B. King, and Sgt. Pepper himself, Billy Preston. Naturally, they lose, because there's good and then there's legendary. After the battle, the cops, Russian mafia, white supremacists, and the Penguins show up, and Elwood has the band perform with the Gator Boys to act as a distraction, instead of explaining themselves for whatever reason, and the film ends with Mac and Cable on stage singing, while Elwood and Buster drive off in the Bluesmobile, where it abruptly transitions to the credits. It's got heart. It's not like it's a cash grab sequel. It has a lot of good moments, especially with Elwood coping with the loss of Jake. You can even think that the reason that he gets the band back together is to get back that sense of normalcy after losing his brother and mentor. I mean, that whole "the Lord works in mysterious ways" crap is probably a coping mechanism, because the last time that Elwood would have presumably been happy would have been during the mission from God, since it was the last time he had an adventure with Jake, and the last time he would have seen Curtis, since they state that he got letters from him, but Curtis never visited. Looking at it that way makes the entire movie really sad, since it's less about the wacky hijinks, and more about reclaiming lost happiness after being released from prison. The music is solid, though there are problems I'll go into later on. A lot of the songs are ones that I genuinely enjoy, like Funky Nassau, John the Revelator, and New Orleans. It does have the one thing a musical is expected to have: good songs. Another thing that worked was that Paul Shaffer returned to do keyboards during Funky Nassau. During their time on SNL, Paul Shaffer was the band leader and the keyboardist for the Blues Brothers band, not Murphy Dunn. But when they went to film the movie, Shaffer was already signed on to do Gilda Radner's one-woman show and was unavailable, requiring his replacement. But he's back in this, and even though Murphy Dunn did a great job, nothing beats Paul Shaffer. All the actors do a great job, though most of them proved themselves in the first one, and even the newcomers like Joe Morton fit in perfectly. And while the pick of musical guests and guest actors isn't quite as strong as the first movie, there are still a lot of good moments, like the bit with Blues Traveler and the stuff with Erykah Badu. I also love how self-aware the movie is of not only the fact that the blues isn't as popular a genre anymore, but also of how silly the premise is. I mean, the original Bluesmobile was a magic car, since it had protection from God to complete the mission before falling apart, but this movie's version is just ludicrous. It can be remote-controlled, drive underwater, it's ridiculous. But I can't help but love every minute of it. And the movie was made by primarily the same production team. Dan Aykroyd wrote it with John Landis, who again returned to direct the movie. So it has all the same effort being put into it. It's not like it was made by someone who didn't know what they were doing. The movie was done by the people behind the original. We'll be right back with more of the show. This is the closest that we're going to get to having a Belushi in the review. And we're back with more of the show. You know what's kind of funny? I'm a New Yorker playing a Canadian who pretends to be from Chicago. The The songs aren't as memorable as the first one. Don't get me wrong, the music is fantastic, but Riders in the Sky can't beat Rawhide, and nothing can beat Minnie the Moocher, Jailhouse Rock, and Everybody Needs Somebody. There's also the issue of how the first movie was more grounded in reality, with implied godlike powers being imbued upon them because God was sending them on a mission. This movie has literal voodoo in it. Queen Musette is not only stated to be immortal, but she has the power to not only give the band the power to play Caribbean music, but also to turn the brothers into statues for some reason. I also hate Buster, but not for the reason that you would think. I don't hate him because they tried to add a kid to the movie. My issue is that he doesn't impact the story at all, and doesn't have any sort of arc. They make you think he has an arc with the whole mentor thing and having Elwood take him on the run at the end, but other than that, regardless of if he was there or not, the movie would have ended up the same. I can't imagine that Elwood wouldn't have found a way to get money for the Bluesmobile, and the only difference at the end would be that Sister Mary Stigmata wouldn't have been chasing them down. It would just have been the cops, Russians, and white supremacists. The story is also a little contrived. There's little to no reason that anything happens. There's no reason that Buster joins Elwood. No reason to get the band back together. No goal. The first movie had a simple goal. Save the orphanage. This movie hits all the same notes, but there isn't a goal to be achieved by doing it. I think that's the one cardinal sin of this movie. There's no reason for it to exist, but there could be. Just one scene explaining why Elwood wants to get the band back together, and one to explain why Buster is gravitating to Elwood, and most of the crap in the movie starts to really mesh together into a good comedy. Not to mention that the movie keeps reminding us about the original, keeps making cheeky references to it, and all it makes me want to do is go rewatch the original. I mean, I want to rewatch the original all the time because it's a great movie, but I shouldn't be watching your sequel and want to just watch the first one. I don't watch Empire or Return of the Jedi and want to watch A New Hope because those are good movies that reference the older material, but still give an interesting film for me to watch in the present. Starred Dan Aykroyd and Jim Belushi. Don't get me wrong, John Goodman and Joe Morton are great, but the only person who can gracefully replace John Belushi is his own brother. That was actually the original plan, with Belushi going to be the Lost Blues Brothers, Z Blues. But Belushi was signed onto a television deal and wasn't available for the movie. I'd have waited to make the movie until he was available, because the Blues Brothers are Aykroyd and Belushi. Even if it's not John Belushi, Jim is the only actor that I would let replace Joliet Jake. I understand why Dan Aykroyd made do with what he had, but I wouldn't have. And I know that John Goodman had performed with Aykroyd as the Blues Brothers before. I just think that for the movie, it would have been important to have a Belushi involved. Also, you know how I gave that reading about the movie being Elwood coping with the loss of Jake? Why not roll with that? Have the movie open the same, but include a scene where Elwood returns to the church from the first movie, which is old and dilapidated now. Then, as Elwood sits in the abandoned church, the blue light returns, and Elwood hears Jake saying, "The band," and is inspired to get the band back together, which would make his "the Lord works in mysterious ways" harken back to the mission from God stuff and make narrative sense. And I wouldn't write out Buster, but I would give him an arc. Maybe we get a flashback to Elwood and Jake's childhood, and we see that Buster is on the same course that Elwood was on, and he tries to help Buster by mentoring him. But naturally, Elwood isn't good at that, and so all he succeeds in doing is turning Buster into a mini Elwood. Other than that, the plot could stay pretty much the same, since what the movie was really missing was a reason to get the band back together, and Jake's ghost would have provided that reasoning for Elwood to suddenly want to rip them from their lives yet again. Honestly, the movie is mostly solid, and there's only a few changes here and there that would make the film work better.
Written by Dan Aykroyd and John Landis.
And that was Blues Brothers 2000. Was it as bad as everyone says? Not really. It's a misguided film, but it's not bad, and with a few small changes, it could have been amazing. Like I've hoped I've shown you guys over the 3 years that I've been doing this show, a lot of what is known as bad can actually be turned into something good with a few tweaks here and there. I mean, the tools are there, but they aren't being utilized to the fullest. They're being used to have all the stuff from the original without any of the purpose of the original. It deserves all the flack that it gets, and we as an audience and the legacy of John Belushi, John Candy, and Cab Calloway deserve a better sequel than this. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of How to Fix It, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. It's 2 minutes to the end of the video. I've got a full shelf of books, half a theme month planned. I'm inside my house and I'm wearing sunglasses. See you next time. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. It's Patreon. We're on a mission from God. Patreon. Mission from God. Patreon.